It's been said that ministry is a dangerous calling. And that's true enough when it comes to our marriages. The pressures of ministry have been known to pit wife against husband against God. If we allow it, ministry can tear marriages and families apart. How can you support and protect your marriage while in ministry? Well, today I talked to a couple who have been in ministry for more than 2 decades. And I got to tell you, if you watch the video on YouTube of this interview, you will see how attentive and just in love these two people are just by looking at them. They are doing something right, and I hope that you will be able to learn from them. Welcome to the Christian Marriage Podcast, the only podcast on the entire internet that talks about Christian marriage that I host. I'm Nick. I'm a Christian marriage coach, and on this podcast, I talk with couples who have been recommended to me as having a Christian marriage full of love and wisdom. We talk about how they made it through hard things in their marriage, and we tell these stories so that you can have great examples of how real couples make it through, so that you can make it through the hard things in your marriage. So let me introduce you to Dave and Laura. Dave and Laura live in Bakersfield, California. They have been married for 20 years. One thing that Laura finds really interesting about Dave is that he was an art major, but also is now a pastor. And so it has this kind of cool mix of this creative, kind of right brain, left brain thing where he's creative, but he's also this tactical leader and pastor. And one of Dave's favorite thing about Laura's is that she has the spiritual gift of helping. He notes that she is super helpful in ministry and in life, and especially whenever he's driving. Oh, honey, I think you're getting a little too close to that car. I think you're supposed to turn back there, that kind of stuff. Now, a couple of principles that stuck out to me from our conversation. Dave and Laura note that they try and live according to the expectation of what it means to live in Christ. And they feel free to say no to the expectations that other people add to the expectation of what it means to live in Christ. Dave references Galatians, which I think is a perfect passage for this topic. One of the major problems in the book of Galatians was that Jewish Christians were trying to get all Christians to follow the Jewish law. Basically, they were saying that a proper relationship with God required justification in Christ and following the law. Or to put it in today's language, we might say that there was a certain group of people in the Galatian church who thought that the whole church should look and act in certain ways. Paul's response to these people was, nah, bro. Paul knew it was dangerous to put additional expectations on the Christian other than the expectation of submission to Christ. Dave and Laura have been able to use this passage and passages like it to come to the mentality that is expressed in this quote. They say, we're going to find what is the expectation to live in Christ, and we're going to live into the freedom that we find in Christ. But we're also going to do it in such a way that brings along the whole body in maturity and in discipleship, as opposed to, let's just sever the whole relationship and be done with it. That is such an important mentality to bring into living under the expectations of people in ministry. Other passages that I think you might, if you're interested in this, other passages that I think would be interesting for you is whenever Paul is involved in circumcision debates in the New Testament. For example, in Acts 16, he circumcises Timothy, but in Galatians 5, he diametrically opposes circumcision for believers. And the tension there forms a really helpful teaching for how to be free, but also to be helpful. So check out Acts 16 and Galatians 5. Also, in Acts 10 and 11, God tells Peter that Peter's expectations might be getting in the way of God's work. But the counterbalance to those passages is 1 Corinthians 8, where Paul talks about food that's been sacrificed to idols. And there he says that he, Paul, is completely free of other people's expectations, but that he is committed to using his freedom in service of the people around him and of the gospel. I'll put a link in the description to an article by R.C. Sproul that kind of goes into this tension more. I think you'll find that helpful. Okay, other principles that stuck out to me. The strong but flexible nature of Dave and Laura's priorities as professional ministers, which are God, wife, kids, church. Now, Dave and Laura note that it's also important to have a long-term view of their relationship in this regard. In fact, Laura specifically noted that years ago, she would have been against sort of any flexibility in these priorities. But over the years, she's come to accept that there are seasons in which Dave has to prioritize church more than maybe their family in ways. But at the same time, she is able to accept flexibility of those priorities because she knows that these priorities are the rule and not the exception. She can deal with an exception to the rule for a while because she knows that eventually we're going to get back to God, wife, kids, church. Now, if you have been ever dealing with bitterness and loneliness because your spouse is drawn to work more than you want them to, Laura made some specific recommendations to be helpful there. She noted that it was really important for her to have a mentor wife, someone to connect with that could lead her, that was a little bit farther down the path that she wanted to go. Found that really helpful. She also noted that gracious persistence in communicating when those priorities felt out of whack was very, very important. And on a general note, I want to say that you should never give up on the fact that you are your spouse's chief calling, even if you don't always feel it. When God pursues the people of Israel, he does so patiently and graciously, but also faithfully and tenaciously. If you are feeling neglected by your spouse because they're drawn towards work, I would suggest choose to focus more on loving your spouse and communicating in love rather than focusing on the things that aren't the way that you want them to be right now. And as you do that, you will help draw them back to you in the same way that God has drawn you back to himself. And then in general, I asked them, what would they say to people who are just busy? So this is Dave and Laura's busyness checklist. 1, use the time in the car purposefully. If you're going somewhere, be together, use that time purposely. Don't be on your phones. Don't do nothing. Connect with each other. Secondly, explore what the other person experienced that day. I would talk about this in terms of externals and internals. Make sure to communicate about what happened in a person's day, in your family's day, the externals, but then also how it affected them, the internals. Thirdly, don't divide and conquer, but do life together. If you have to go to the store and it's a busy day and there's lots of stuff to get done, it's actually more important to maybe just go to the store together and use it as a chance to connect, just be together and do relationship together. Don't divide and conquer, do life together. Well, I really enjoyed connecting with Dave and Laura. I think you're going to really enjoy them. And I think that you can learn a lot from how they have been able to manage years, decades of life in ministry and life in marriage. So I hope you enjoy Dave and Laura. Dave and Laura, thank you so much for joining me on the Christian Marriage Podcast. I'm really looking forward to talking with you guys. I was just thinking about earlier this morning, like almost as soon as I woke up this morning, I was looking forward to talking with you guys. Well, not completely, because my kids actually got up at like 4:30 this morning, so I didn't actually start looking forward to it until like 6:30 after a couple cups of coffee, right? But I was really looking forward to it because I love these episodes where we can talk about how God has helped you. And they're just such refreshing conversations where we can tell the story of how God has blessed you and what he has helped you walk through, and just glory in it a little bit. It's always really encouraging for me. So thank you for joining me. And I'm really looking forward to talking with you guys.
Yeah, we're glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So you guys have decided to talk about being married in the course of doing ministry professionally. So Dave, you are a pastor, right?
Yep.
And Laura, what are you a pastor, or are you in professional ministry at all?
Not anymore. I have been in the past in different roles: children's ministry, women's ministry, part-time paid roles. That was never my intention when I was a younger person, thinking I have a call to ministry, or I'd like to be, in vocational ministry. But then I found a pastor husband, and that just kind of rolled into kind of who we were as a couple. But my experience has been a lot of different varieties of ministry, children's through women's. But only a couple of times in our marriage have I been also vocationally focused on ministry in that way. Trying to remember how many times, I guess maybe just 2 times in our marriage we've been together paid ministry, and only 1 time we've shared church employer. We were working at separate churches at one point, and then we were at the same church in different departments.
So when we started dating, she was the children's admin at one church, and I was a youth pastor at another church. And so through dating and engagement, we were at 2 separate churches at the time. And then when we got married, trying to figure out how it's going to work, how ministry life was going to move forward, as now we're one, but we are at 2 different churches. So yeah.
And we were I felt like most churches were in a very healthy place as far as who we were to be part of those separate teams. And so when we got married, there wasn't this like automatic, like, oh, Laura's leaving to go be with Dave, because I think we both saw the value in the teams that we were working with. Yep. We had a lot of history at the church that I was working at. And so there was a little bit of that, like, okay, we're married now. Obviously, Sunday mornings we made the decision to be together, but we were really just kind of focused on different ministries altogether. Him youth, me children's ministry, and it in similar or nearby towns even, but fairly separate as far as ministry goals go, because we were just kind of trying to pay the bills as a young couple, you know, that kind of thing, both going to school and all of that.
Yeah. For sure. Right. Okay. Yeah. So you've been kind of in ministry separately and also, in ministry together at the same place. You've had both of those experiences, is what you're saying.
Yeah, we have. Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That's
There
amazing. Okay. So what has been kind of the hardest part of going through, of just being married in professional ministry? What do you think some of the hardest parts have been?
I would say two things could pop up first in my mind. One, just the exposure of our marriage and our family eventually once we had kids. Um, that feeling of just kind of like someone's always watching,
Yeah.
and maybe not in a bad way. Oftentimes, again, we've worked for really healthy churches, and oftentimes people are just, praising you like, oh, you have such a great marriage, or you guys are so cute. The high schoolers would say that. But then even in the positive light, it's like, that's a lot of pressure on a new couple. Like, we're fighting at home, but like, hey, we're feeling really great as ministry partners. Anyway, that's just the exposure. I mean, there's negatives that come with that too. Thankfully, we have been very well cared for in the churches we've worked at.
Yeah.
But then the second thing too is just the divided time that comes. We're with each other a lot, but there's a lot of just time expectation with ministry life, and sometimes that works great because we can all be together and help each other, and then other times that can get really bitter feeling because 12, 14, 16-hour days are not what we had planned for our raising children and that sort of thing. So there's that kind of like pull of like whose time is more important, ministry wise and family wise.
Yeah.
And marriage wise.
Yeah.
There's just all the things trying to balance.
Trying to figure out how to share our family with our church family. We believe that the church really is a family, brothers and sisters in Christ, and that we should live into that. But at the same time, when you have a wife and kids, and there's expectations piled upon them, and trying to navigate those roles so that, first of all, I'm not taken away from them. They are a priority for me, but also making sure they know, like, grow into the person that God has intended you to be, not what the church believes you should be. And working that out with our now 15 and 18-year-old, when, there are cultural expectations, there are church expectations, and trying to let them know, like, hey, you can be a normal kid. It's okay. It's all right. And even trying to make sure that Laura has her space, because there's, even with her having a ministry, actually, I would say with the ministry background she has, there's probably even a higher expectation for her to fulfill that kind of pastor's wife duty that some people receive. And then, no, she's not going to do that. Like, she can think about it. She can get back to you, but that's not something that I, as her husband pastor, is going to just tell her she needs to do, that type of stuff.
Yeah. A particular example of that, Dave was a junior high minister when we first got married, and pretty early on, he was asked to be, or he got the position of the high school director, and they needed a junior high person to fill in. And before the junior high position even opened up, Dave and I had really, I think, a great balanced conversation about what ministry that I would like to be in. I had been involved in children's ministry, and we obviously knew that being involved is just part of the gig. But where was a very freeing conversation. Take your time, figure it out. I was now attending his church more, and so as it became our church, the opportunity arose for this junior high interim position. And the senior pastor asked me, "Hey, Laura, do you want to step in for a few months while we find this director?" And now all of a sudden we're like, "Oh, now you're the high school guy and I'm the junior high lady." And we're literally just working side by side. Do we want to do this, kind of thing. And it was only for a few months. I don't know, decades of that would have been healthy for our marriage. But as a young couple, it was really fun because we got to, kind of dream together for the youth group. And we both got to talk about like, man, this is like really hard to teach twice a week or to find, how to entertain these kids, kind of thing. So there was positives and negatives, but for sure the expectations, the church was kind of like, oh, Laura's here now. Let's put her to work. And
there was quite a lot of that.
It seemed an easy and, easy fulfillment.
Yes.
On their part, but it was, I think, a little bit challenging for us at times too.
Yeah, for sure. I know I've heard of so many wives just, like almost free labor. Is that how you put it? There's this assumption that, oh, well, it's like a package deal or something like that, right?
Yeah.
How have you guys, I mean, just on that point, how have you learned to manage other people's expectations and, like, I don't know, I forget what exactly you said, Dave, but it was something like create or give her own space or something like that. How have you done
space. Well, part of it is I don't take everything home with me. We are very open and we talk about a lot of stuff, but there are those times that if someone comes up with an unrealistic expectation, I don't take that home. It just stops wherever that was. And
like
otherwise,
as if to say you don't talk to Laura about it.
Yeah, sometimes. So
no, go ahead. No.
I was just thinking like, there's been moments where someone would say, well, of course Laura would do that. And if I know full well that like that is not an interest at all for her, she's the pastor's wife, so of course she should go. Those stuff don't make it home. But I'll share with you, there's other times where just recently I went from being the family pastor guy to I was an interim at the time, I guess you would say. I was filling in after two pastors left, and we were looking for a new pastor. And I'm still at the same church. So now I'm an assistant, and I have congregational care underneath my wheelhouse. So to go to her and say, hey, in my role as the congregational care pastor, I'm going to retirement home, and I'm going to go have lunch with some of our older congregation members. Would you like to come with me? And that seems like a very pastoral wife thing to do, but I'm happy to share those moments with her. Whereas of course, she's going to be on this committee or that board or something that I just know she has no interest in. It's like, yeah, I'm just going to let that one pass by.
I don't think I've ever, trying to think over 20 years, a lot of days, but I don't think I've ever felt pressure from Dave in a conversation to be like, hey, you probably should go to this thing, or they're really looking for someone to do this class, or, there's always conversation about like, would you be interested, or are you going to do this? But there's not ever been this kind of like, hey, so as not to embarrass me, you need to be part of this. And I really appreciate that. And I think I know that we have brought that into parenting too. There's been plenty of times where we've got messages or requests for, hey, can your boys go do this? Or I know that they're not, involved yet. So here's a position, volunteer positions, A, B, and C. Which one do they want to do? Like, actually, they don't want to do any of those. And it's fine. It's no big deal. And we've learned to not really apologize for that and just say thanks and just leave it at that. We don't need to come up with an excuse. We don't need to come up with, reasons why this other thing that they're doing is better or more important. Just no thanks. We're good.
Yeah. Has that ever been, is that something that comes naturally to you guys, or is that something you've had to work on? Like maybe you just don't care about people, you know what I mean? No, that's a joke.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
you're right on though. Like our weakness is like callousness. I mean, we can be kind of like whatever, you know. I think
I totally get that, by the way. Yeah.
there kind of part of that. I think is like a little bit of self-preservation. You know, knowing that we were kind of on display as a young couple. And I don't mean to make us sound like celebrities or anything in our church, but you know, just having people watch, you know, kind of everything that you do. I think there was kind of this protection that we built up to say, you know, we don't have to apologize for who our family is.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been times, conversations, I think both of us have had individually where people have kind of let us know, you know, this isn't really the way we expected you to be acting, whether it's involved or, you know, excited for a certain area of ministry.
Yeah.
But I think that we've just, as to protect our family, we've just had to say, you know what, we can let our yes be yes and our no be no, and that doesn't have to be this kind of storytelling to prove it.
I'll give a really mundane issue, but I think a lot of folks might well, depending on what church they go to, they might kind of commiserate with it. But working in youth ministry all these years, one of my goal was just to get kids into the sanctuary and worshiping alongside the whole body.
Yes.
And I've had issues with adults commenting on like, why are you wearing that ball cap? What are you doing in jeans? Where's your tie? You know, like, and
Yeah.
things have evolved over time where we're a little, at least in California, we're much more relaxed in what we wear on Sunday. But my kids will show up. You know, they're teenagers. They barely ran a comb through their hair, so of course they threw on a ball cap. And the second they get to church, someone's like, "Why are you wearing your ball cap?" And I've had those conversations with my sons, telling them, you know, it's respectful to take the hat off. It's something that you can and probably should do in most cases. But I also understand that you didn't have time to do your hair this morning, and it's kind of embarrassing to take that cap off. So, you know, and having those conversations with them, not necessarily putting that strict tradition expectation on them, but kind of coaching them into, okay, we might be able to meet this standard, but we want to meet it on our own terms, not just because they're the ones saying that this is what you should do. We want to do it because we don't want to cause them to stumble, as opposed to uh, uh, just doing it because you're going to keep them from, you know, kind of talking behind your back or whatever. So,
Yeah. It's kind of out of, so the tension that you're working with there is you want to be respectful of other people's, our brothers and sisters, like they have expectations, and you even kind of referenced Paul talking about expectations that people have, and we can't just disregard them.
Right.
But it sounds like you're saying I'm also not going to live in the fear of those expectations or make decisions kind of because I'm placing myself under the power of other people's expectations.
Right.
How would you say more about how would you describe that?
well, since we kind of landed into scripture, you know, it's kind of like in the book of Galatians where you have these Judaizers, these people who are showing up, causing a disruption, saying, well, you need to behave like us. You need to be, even though you are a Gentile Christian, you need to become a Jew. And Paul's saying, no, that's not what we find in Christ. There is great freedom in Christ. And we're going to find, we're going to find out what the law is. He actually has some not so nice things to say about the Judaizers, but that said is, we're going to find what is the expectation to live in Christ. And we're going to live into the freedom that we find in Christ, but we're also going to do it in such a way that brings along the whole body in maturity and in discipleship, as opposed to, you know, let's just sever it and be done.
But
Yeah.
this may be veering a little bit from our initial topic, but I really think that connecting our family with the church congregants has been the key to that, because when people do have an issue, or a comment, we very quickly can kind of, I don't know, filter the comment through relationship, right?
Yeah, no, that's true.
So if someone comes up that we don't know, we don't talk to, they don't come very often, they're a once every 6 weeks kind of church person, and they're going to be like, hey, I had this, like, your kids misbehaving, when the boys were little, it was like they were squiggling all over the pews. Like, hey, wouldn't it be nice if kids went to church, went to Sunday school and they weren't distracting and, big church or whatever? I don't know you. It's like, okay, thanks for the comment. Bye. But if it was, at the same time, we would have with all kinds of what some people might call grandmas and grandpas or aunts and uncles in the church who have relationships. They've taught our kids in Sunday school. They've taken our kids on beach trips, that sort of thing. And those are the adults in the room who are literally just leaning over the pew and going, hey, buddy, just need to be kind of quiet right now, and helping us parent or making that comment out of love in a relationship. And that is much more well received because my kids are like, oh, I know that that's Mrs. So-and-so and she cares about me. And so if I'm misbehaving or being disrespectful in the moment, that's going to be accepted. And that's something that we want the whole church body to be part of, instead of just this kind of like, oh, you're a PK or you're a pastor's wife, you need to do this, kind of thing. So I think that's been a huge impact on our family to have different special relationships with a lot of different people. Maybe not super deep, but just we know that they care. They know that we care.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. That you would have, you have the trust that these aunts and uncles, grandmas and grandpas, have deep care for you, and okay, they have expectations, but you can receive them because you know that there's a mutuality and a relationship and a love and a care there. So it makes you more willing to receive from them, but it's also, you can do relationship in a way where if somebody's coming from that you don't have a relationship with, it's like,
yeah, thanks, but no thanks.
yeah, like I was gonna say like, okay, so what? But it's kind of like that.
It
maybe not totally, right?
It feels a little bit like the comment card, in when you fill those out. It's like, okay, like, and maybe, and sometimes people do say valid things. If we've misspoken or something, like, oh, okay, that is something. Maybe we don't have a relationship with that person, but they have a valid point. We can go and reflect on that and have a conversation about that privately. But I don't need to be like, be doing that in front of people or really taking value in the moment, but just maybe kind of taking it to heart and dealing with it later.
I don't do this very well with physical things, but there's something called the one touch rule. Whereas, like, if you get a piece of mail or even if you open up your email, it's like, rather than leaving it there for you to deal with later, just deal with it now. And I think we do that when we receive a comment from someone that we don't know super well. It's kind of that one touch rule that we do receive it. We take a moment to evaluate it. And it might be a very quick evaluation, but you get to that point where it's just like, okay, thank you. Let's move on. I've dealt with it. I don't think that's something I need to take back to my wife or my children, and we'll just be done.
I guess the thing that sticks out in what you're saying already is we've been able to prioritize each other even amid everybody else's, like, the noise. I hesitate to call it noise, but there's a lot of voices around you. But the picture I'm getting is that you two have been able to prioritize and maybe even seek out each other's voice, and then like interpret all of these other voices according to each other's voice and preferences. Yeah. Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, I think that's fair. There's some, it's a really interesting dynamic. I think there's push and pull, because when I think of prioritization, it's like there's a ranking, right? And it's first God, then my wife, then my kids, and then the church family's down here somewhere. And I, there's been seasons where we've had to be a little bit more adaptable than that. My tendency is actually to gravitate towards my wife and kids when I'm stressed. So when things are getting really difficult at church, there's that, okay, am I spending enough time at home? I'm afraid to give that up. And so Laura's actually the one that's giving me permission through all of that, saying like, hey, you know what? This is just a season. We can go another couple nights without you making it to the dinner table. It's all right. Like I mentioned, we had a pastor retire and another one took a call all within a month of each other. And for 9 months, I was solo pastoring a medium-sized church with really no necessary end in sight, and trying to adapt to that, because now I was on a committee before, now I'm on all the committees, and Laura throughout all of that is just like, okay, no, we'll find our time, we'll find that space. When we check in, we're going to make sure that's quality check in. One of our traditions is every time we sit down to the dinner table, we go around and do highs and lows. Everybody shares the high and low for the day. And so when we get to the table, she makes sure that happens.
Yeah, I think, like Dave was saying, the kind of the ranking, I think early on in our marriage, that was a little bit more maybe just superficial in the idea of like, oh, obviously what we said in our vows is, gonna stay like the thing, And as we all get older and more experienced in different areas, we realize that is just constantly moving, and whether we want to or not, and whether it's good for us or not. And to be, realistic, it's like, obviously God is going to be the first one. Sometimes that's not true. And we feel that in our marriage and our family. And hopefully we can get things kind of rearranged. But below that, I think that there really are times when I cannot be Dave's priority. And as if somebody would have told me that when, 3 years into marriage, I would have been so offended and felt like that's unbiblical, like absolutely not. But because we've been able to have this kind of long-term view of our life together, it's okay for it to be, a couple of weeks or months or hours, in the day where it's like, okay, you know what, this other thing can be his priority, because I know eventually we will get back to our ranking, for lack of a better term. Even the kids, when they were younger, it's like, it felt like there were seasons of like, when are we going to see Padre? When are we going to see Papa? And there, I felt like it was really important as a mom of a minister to be able to not be bitter in that moment, and to really reflect on, we are not staying for dinner tonight, but we get to go to Padre's office anytime we want. And you guys have a box of toys in Padre's office, and you can just hang out. And we go to his work every Sunday, and you can, 100 people, so trying to figure out like that ranking, maybe that felt fairly stiff in the beginning of our marriage, and ended up, causing conflict because I didn't feel like it was a priority, or even if it was God, Laura, church, then kids, because kids take a lot of time and church takes a lot of time. That felt very unbalanced for a long time. And I think the eventuality of just understanding this is a long haul. And so over the average of our hopefully 70 years together, we will, keep those things prioritized in the right way. But there are going to be seasons where it's just not the reality to keep it in the order that we thought it might stay.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And you can make it through the exceptions, because you know that the norm is something that you guys have agreed on, and you both feel really good about what the norm is, and so you can do the exceptions, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's two directions that I could see someone really struggling with this. One is, of course, I mean, someone who's called to ministry, it's their passion. and they're in it, they're doing it, they they love it, they're probably good at it, and kind of being a little bit more sort of kind of classic workaholic type thing going on, and sort of being drawn in that direction. I could see someone sort of struggling with that. And then the other obvious one is, I think you already mentioned it, Laura, there's this idea of being passed over, or being bitter about, oh, he's working so much and not with us, and feeling really alone, actually. And I know that I've talked with people who really feel that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Both people in ministry and just in like regular jobs.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you could speak for a minute, how would you, if you were speaking to like Dave, if you were speaking to a person who really was being drawn toward a misbalance of what you say there, like to put, let's say, God and work maybe get mingled a little bit, and that it starts drawing them maybe more away from their family. Like, what would you say to that person? And then I'll come to you, Lauren. Like, what would you say to that wife who maybe is struggling with that bitterness or that side of things, right? So what do you think, Dave?
There's a biblical principle of rest, right? So God created these rhythms in our own life, and you see them in the opening pages of Genesis, where it says there was evening and there was morning the first day. There was evening in the morning the second day, and that continues on. And it's actually interesting in the Jewish mindset that you start with the evening, right? We as Americans, we start with the morning because that's when we wake up and we go to work. But they would actually begin with rest, and they would work out of that restfulness instead of we rest from our work. And then on top of it, there is the seventh day, right? There's the Sabbath. And we think about the Sabbath as being a command to worship God and to keep it holy. But remember, at the end of 6 days of creation, God himself rested. So there's this rhythm of daily rest, weekly rest. And then if you look into the Old Testament schedules of festivals, man, they really like to take breaks. They would stop from the harvest and the rhythms, and they would go to the holy city and they would throw a big party, and I think that's something to keep in mind, is that there are going to be seasons of intensity where work is expected, that there are things you need to do, but building in those moments where you reach for each other, that whether it's at least a daily check-in, typically around noon, one of us sends the other a text that says, how's your day going? And then when I finally get home or she gets home, and you have that last connection in the evening, even if I missed dinner and I've got like maybe 1 hour to spend with my family before we tell everybody to go to bed, there's still a bit of that check-in. And then, okay, darling, it's time. You and me, we need to go out on date night, or you and me, we need to get away for the weekend because that battery's depleted and we need to reprioritize each other. So that's what I would share for sure.
Yeah.
How do you know if you've reached a point where like it's time, or it's, where you feel like you have lost connection or something like that?
Yeah, that's hard to tell sometimes.
Yeah. For me, I think there's this, bitterness isn't the word, but there's this kind of like this feeling in the pit of my stomach that something's off, something's wrong. Discontentment is a great word for it. You just get to that, like, okay, I'm drained, I'm tired, I'm getting grouchy, and it's not just because I didn't eat breakfast this morning. You just get to that point, and when you evaluate it, you realize that maybe there's a little loneliness there, like you mentioned loneliness earlier. There's a little loneliness there, or maybe there's maybe a little jealousy because you're not getting the attention or the encouragement that you would hope to get. Maybe even you haven't been getting the intimacy that you think you need, and that resentment might start to build up a little bit. And you're like, no, okay, time out, time to go do something to make that reconnection.
Right. So you're saying there, I mean, there's a certain self-awareness of you have to have. You have to have this kind of, you're evaluating yourself.
Yeah.
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 I think it's also, I mean, to be just kind of very practical, I think, the way that your organization takes care of you. I mean, Dave literally has days on the calendar that he's like, you are owed 3 weeks of vacation or whatever. It's like, oh,
That helps.
it's October and you haven't taken any of your days. Like that's a little bit, just kind of being, aware of the practical, days on the calendar, as well as working with people and having people around you outside of our marriage that say like, I noticed that you're like, maybe need a couple days, like that,
Yeah.
just kind of feeling like maybe not necessarily saying like, you're really grouchy, Dave, go home. But that feeling, that just kind of checking in of like, hey, you need to make sure you take some time, or,
Yeah.
just checking in to, what have you and Laura been doing? When was the last time you had a vacation together? I think somebody asked that, or our senior pastor from a while ago asked that at one point, and it was like, we're in year 15, maybe like our anniversary, the 5th anniversary.
Our 10th anniversary. It was our 10th anniversary.
Yeah. So it was like, oh, okay. So having people in your life that kind of just casually maybe check in on that, not formally, but it helps to really honor, the organizationally what's been set up for you too.
Yes. Yeah. So both from the organization that you work for, but also people that are just in your life, and kind of highlights the importance of, because not everybody's going to have a good organization, but everybody can have good people around them and can seek out good people to mentor them or something like that, right?
Yeah. When we were younger, and we were living back home, Bakersfield is our home now, but we grew up about 2 blocks from each other. And so when we got married, it's like both sets of grandparents, or well, that would be future grandparents, both sets of parents
In-law.
were very close by. So when we started having kids, it was like, okay, my mom can come over and watch them on Monday nights, and so that we can have a date night. And on Wednesday nights, your parents can come over and watch the kids so that you and I can serve the youth ministry. And you had this rhythm where we had a really strong, really good network. And, when we moved, we had to completely adapt because that network wasn't there anymore. And we lucked out that we have a very healthy church that was concerned for us and very generous towards us. But at the same time, a weekly date night wasn't in the cards. So we had to figure out what that meant.
Hard to figure it out, right?
Yep.
What about you, Laura? So what would you say to that wife who is just struggling with giving up so much, what feels to her as too much time? And I don't know, what we should assume. There's probably plenty of men that we could say like, okay, look, bro, it is too much time, right?
They're workaholics there.
Yeah, sure. But let's say she wanted to work on herself, in her heart, deal with the things that she's feeling of loneliness or bitterness or something like that. Is how would you talk to that sister?
Gosh, there's so much. I mean, that's like, could be, days of conversation. But I think that in my own experience, I have found that having women around me that are not my parents' age, but the age, the in-between generation, that are 5, 10, 15 years just in between my experience and my parents' experience, has been an incredible gift and
A resource.
Yeah, it's a great word for it. Resource to watch and talk through and kind of bounce ideas off of. And again, we've tried really hard. We don't know everyone in our church, and nor did we at the last church that we were at. But as a young couple, we really tried to seek out those in-between generations, because we were, if I were to go to my friend who's also been only married, a couple of years, her husband's just getting into his career, and we're both just like ticked, that we're home by ourselves every night. It's just gonna, develop more and more bitterness, and it feels really good at the time because, it's like, oh, you get me, But to then be able to talk to somebody who's 10 years older than me, whose husband is maybe more into their career, who is maybe their the woman is actually, established, more of her independent work choices in their relationship as well. That kind of wisdom and experience spoke much more strongly into what I wanted for our own marriage. And to be able to hear it's just a season, or you need to talk to him, because if you don't, you're going to get to year 7 that is really just terrible. And went through that. Don't go through that, kind of the warnings even.
Yeah.
That was an incredible gift to me, because not only as eventually a young mom, watching how they were parenting their kids who were 5 or 10 years older than mine, then also the experience that they had had with their own husbands, even that them going through maybe some really real difficulties before we did. And then once we got there, it was like, oh, this is okay. Like so-and-so went through this and they're through it, then as uncomfortable and terrible as it may have been between the two of us, there's still kind of that in the back of my head, I'm eventually going to be able to talk to him about how I really feel, or he will eventually be back home if we keep checking in and I keep on reminding him that we need to, take time, or, be with the kids without screens, or take a drive, or, those kind of things. So the relationships that in between generation relationships just, I think, really changed our marriage, or supported our marriage, I should say, right from the beginning. The other thing that I think Dave kind of brought up at the beginning, is that I am more of the extrovert than Dave is. And so I usually have more words than he does.
Yep.
And so I kind of took on that role fairly quickly to keep talking. And I think that love this man so much, he would rather not talk and think about it. And I would rather talk and not think about it. And so there's this like kind of back and forth of, hey, you ready to talk about it? Nope. Okay. All right. I'll just wait it out. But eventually I'm just going to be that really just kind of annoying, like, well, we got to talk about this, or this is still a thing, or I'm still feeling like this. And there wasn't that maybe necessary kind of maturity in conversation that always happened, but just the persistence of checking in and making sure either Dave knew it's a season where I'm feeling a little bit more confident about myself and my role. Do your thing. I'll see you next weekend, that kind of thing. Or, it's the 3 or 4 times in a day check in and like, hey, like I'm here.
Yeah.
You see us?
The kids are little. You're feeling isolated. You need contact with the human world. So.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Very real.
Just maybe a persistence in communication.
Yeah.
Whether or not it was quality. I think the worst times in our marriage have been when communication has shut down. And that seems fairly easy or powerful in the moment, but then it's like, well, it's just gonna eventually break through.
Yeah. I think
for sure.
Texting is like one of the best and worst things, because on one hand, I think the information I give her is much more succinct now, so it doesn't have necessarily as much of that relational flair it did early on in our marriage. But now I can send her like random funny memes and like just kind of those check-ins that say, hey, I'm thinking about you, as opposed to like trying to sync up the time where I'm going to actually get a hold of her on the phone and be able to relay that message. And yeah, so we can have 4 or 5 or even 6 text strings throughout the day, as opposed to maybe we can check in on you with each other at lunchtime,
Right. I hear what you're saying, Laura, and I think that's it. I think it's really important that you had these people who had been through some of what you were going through before and could kind of draw you out of it and kind of give you a perspective other than your perspective in that moment. Of course, it's great to link arms with someone who's going through exactly what you're going through, but it can, that I think you're saying that can kind of turn into the blind leading the blind. Whereas somebody who has been a little bit down the path that I want to be going down, those were really invaluable relationships to like help you get to where you were actually trying to go.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, not to belittle either of these two categories, but reading books about marriage or looking to our parents and our grandparents who have very successful marriages, um, that was almost like too much or too overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Almost that idea of, when you're first, I don't know about everyone's experience, but our experience was we did not have a lot of expendable finances when we were first married. We were living in a small space, and then looking at, our parents who have established, their own homes in, very different ways than we had, and, owned cars. And we were barely like hanging on to like, the junkers that, we wanted,
Yes.
that we had to drive, not we wanted to drive, but it was just kind of that like, wow, like, I don't know if I can ever get there. It was almost depressing to
Yeah.
read marriage books and like, well, we got through this thing and we're in 40 years and it's so great. It just felt like maybe too high of an expectation, or I didn't know how to climb that high of a mountain. But then the in between, it was like, okay, you're close enough that you kind of get me. But I feel like it's maybe a manageable hill that we can climb to get over.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Right. To not have the whole journey, like I'm just trying to, make it to next week or something like that.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
I think some of the stories that really helped us were almost cautionary tales of folks who came so close to the brink of divorce, or other issues, and how it's actually a lot like what you're doing with this podcast. It's people who have faced some major issue in their marriage and how they overcame it, and then seeing them on the other side of that and how they've changed their communication, or how they've been able to adjust expectations, and now they're in an even stronger, healthier place than they were before they went through it.
So you already mentioned some of this, but I'm also just thinking of, we're all so busy. I mean, that's not a ministry thing. That's like it's an American thing, or like a Western culture thing, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
You mentioned like the text messages and self-awareness that allows you to say, okay, my priorities are functionally a little out of whack right now, and I need to do a reset.
Mm-hmm.
So those seem like really practical kind of things that you guys have already talked about in terms of just staying connected with each other in a world where life is pulling you in so many different directions, and there's so many good directions. What is like an idea that you have been able to implement, or that like a foundational idea, maybe a theological idea, or just something that you have done that practically has been really helpful in helping maintain a connection through just busyness?
Well, I've got a couple, but you want to go first?
Mine's just very, very practical out of our experience as a family who, is involved in a lot of things. Being in the car together has been one of like the most, I don't know, life giving things for our whole family, not just Dave and I. But we often talk about, we're again doing youth ministry a while ago, and we often talk about the trips, the traveling with students in our cars, or a van or something. And of course you're the driver, and you've got this one kid who gets like the front seat, and they're not having the grand old time in the back listening to great music and making jokes. And sometimes it's like, okay, yeah, I'll sit in the front, and other times the kid was super excited to sit. But there was something magical. It's not really magical, but there's something special about having that conversation, that opportunity for conversation. You're physically close to each other, but you're not facing each other. You're trapped.
You're also trapped. Yeah.
Yep.
Like, but there's plenty of distraction to not have that kind of pressure to be put on, like, keep talking. And so we just discovered, in those youth ministry times, that is really, really valuable time.
Mm-hmm.
And we early on in our marriage would just take drives, and it was like, because we didn't have money to go out, it was like gas was cheaper at that time.
At that time, yeah.
Than
what it is now.
Than going to a restaurant or whatnot. And so we would just drive for an hour and talk and not talk, and so I think that has been something for us, even if we're literally just going to drop off the kids, or we end up getting in the car together going to church, or to an activity, the four of us or just the two of us. That time is, I mean, it just is worked into your schedule. I mean, obviously there's probably families that never get in the car together. There's, four cars in the family and everyone the different places. But finding an opportunity to be together in the car has just seemed like one of those times where you don't have to schedule it. You don't have to put it on the calendar. It's not official date night with the extra pressure of like looking cute and having a good conversation. But just the casualness of getting in the car and a 15-minute conversation has really, I think, brought value to our whole family.
It could take, you have to be willing to use that purposefully and like have that as a goal almost, without putting a lot of pressure on yourself either. So it's complicated, but I love that you noted that, like, that's been a real sweet spot for you. Yeah. What do you think, Dave?
Well, I think going back to the dinner table highs and lows, I mean, maybe it doesn't happen over the dinner table because, when your kids get older, they have sports and it runs right through. And, but so many times families figure out logistics. They'll take that time to go over tomorrow's calendar or whatever to make sure that communication bit happens. But take the moment to like actually explore what the other person experienced that day. Not just like, oh, I passed my test today, but okay, tell me a little bit about that. Like, how did that feel? Or why do you think you passed it today? What was the extra thing that got you over that hurdle? And so I think that's one thing. The other thing that Laura was really good at this is, what can you do together? Jobs, there was times where our jobs took us in two very different places, but her gift of being a helper comes in because when I'm doing specifically a marriage event and she's right there helping me set up for it, decorate for it, get ready for it. Now she's putting value into something that's super important to me. That's part of my job. But
we're just spending time together.
But we're just spending time together. And then there's, just showing interest in something that they like, like when she watches a sci-fi movie, that means everything to me because she doesn't particularly care for sci-fi, but I equally will watch a rom-com, or I will help her set up for a women's event, or, there's just those moments of how can we be alongside each other? And since this is a marriage podcast, I would include making sure that the physical intimacy is in there somewhere too. Not only that you're just finding that time to share, but that you're making sure that you have skin on skin contact, that there is a physical time for you to be together. Because that's just so incredibly important.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's good. And it can take some, again, like purposefulness and creativity to ask the question, what could we do together? Because I talk to people, not infrequently, who are like, what could we do? Like, they're like, nothing occurs to them. Maybe that, I don't know, maybe there's literally no possibility that they could. Probably what's more likely is that you're going to have to be creative.
Yeah.
You're going to have to shake the trees a little bit to figure out how you're going to get some of the fruit off of it, but there's something usually, right?
Well, this was a principle we used to teach in youth ministry with my volunteers is, how do you spend time with a student, right? If sometimes there's room for meeting them for a Starbucks coffee or taking them out to a pizza or something like that. But then there's times, and Laura, again, was really good at this, was you call up one of those young girls and say, hey, will you help me grocery shop? I've got a 2-year-old and I need to go to the local grocery store, and It'd be really helpful if you went with me. And now that young girl is spending time with Laura, and they're having that life on life connection at that point. And
Yeah.
it's she had to go a little out of her way to pick the kid up and to do all that, but it was so worth it in the end. You know, we as married couples, it's like, okay, a lot of times it's divide and conquer, but what if you just bit the bullet and did the grocery shopping together? Once instead of the guy just doing all the yard work, you did the yard work together. What is it that we can share in particular moments that at least will get something accomplished and yet still be valuable that we were in it?
I have noticed for sure that the more normal, mundane, non-glamorous moments that we spend together are maybe more valuable. I don't know if it's more valuable or more. I like it. I enjoy it more. There's less pressure, right? I still love dressing up and like going out and, having a new experience together. But to be able to say, Dave's he's fixing a sprinkler outside. He's going to go to Home Depot for the fourth time, that I'll go with you, and we'll look at like some plants and some, furniture while we walk through, grocery shopping. One of the sweetest things he's ever done on Valentine's Day is I was at the grocery store. We were checking in with each other in the late afternoon. I'm at the grocery store with both the kids. And he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, the grocery haul. And he shows up at the grocery store and I'm like, what are you doing here? He's like, I'm going shopping with you guys. Entertains the kids in the aisles. I'm like, this is the sweetest thing ever. And obviously there was no like gift or formality to it, but it just, bringing up the car thing too, it's just a couple of minutes in the car on the way to Home Depot or whatnot that it just kind of takes the pressure off.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting that throughout all of what you guys are saying, there is a certain priority and a certain choosing to focus on each other that kind of undergirds kind of everything that you're saying. Like, everything else is happening. There's all of everybody's expectations. There's stuff with the kids. There's life stuff. There's the to-do list. Life is happening, but we're gonna fight all of that off and kind of be open to each other, and also like almost force ourselves to prioritize each other, and because that's a conscious thing that you guys have tried to do and have been able to do in some practical ways. So I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Well, I got to let you guys go. It has been a lot of fun talking with you. So thank you so much for being with me, like I said, and this has been really helpful. So thank you.
For sure. Our pleasure. It's been fun.
We appreciate it.